Now, as we mentioned earlier, police raided several properties today in Barking. That's an area of East London. They arrested 12 people in connection with last night's attack. One of the homes raided is believed to be where one of the attackers had been living. Our special correspondent, Ed Thomas, has the latest now on the extensive police investigation.
Tonight, the focus of the police investigation, a block of flats in Barking. Here, women were escorted from the building. This video clip was taken by those living inside. Armed police surround men lying on their floor, their hands behind their backs. So far, 12 people have been arrested. The BBC also understands one of the London attackers who died lived here. We're not naming him at the request of the police, but we've spoken to this man who says he knew him. He says over the past 2 years, the attacker became more and more extreme.
We spoke about a particular attack that happened, and like most radicals, he had a justification for anything, for everything and anything. And that day I realised that I need to contact the authorities.
He'd only speak to the BBC's Asian network as long as we protected his identity and changed his voice.
He used to listen to a lot of Musa Jibril. I've heard some of this stuff and it's very radical. I'm surprised some of this stuff is still on YouTube and easily accessible. I phoned the anti-terrorist hotline. I spoke to the gentleman. I told him about our conversation and why I think he's been radicalised.
We've put these allegations to the police. The friend believes the attacker was not arrested even after he was reported.
I did my bit. I know a lot of people did, but the authorities didn't do their bit.
Is that him?
Yes, another guy.
This couple say they also reported the same man to police more than 2 years ago after he tried to befriend their children.
What did you think they were doing?
Radicalizing the kids. Sorry, the message was clear.
And if you are not Muslim, you don't follow in the religion of Muslim basic rules, you're basically going to hell.
He said to me, because the kids need to be saved. Saved from what? From this world.
We still don't know if any chances to stop these men were missed. For now, the focus is on a search for evidence and answers. This is now the heart of the investigation. It started with anti-terror raids just hours after the attack. And now forensic teams are focused on this ground floor flat at the side of the block. And this was East Ham this evening. A man scrambles across a rooftop as armed officers train their guns at the windows. This investigation is still far from over. Ed Thomas, BBC News, Barking in East London.
So where do we stand tonight then with the state of the police investigation? Let's go to New Scotland Yard. Our Home Affairs correspondent Daniel Sanford is there. Daniel, what's been established so far?
Well, I think police made good progress today, to be honest with you. They quickly identified the three main suspects, the three men that they'd already shot dead. That allowed them to quickly get to Barking, to raid those two addresses in northeast London and to arrest 12 people, 7 women and 5 men, though one of those men has since been released. Whether or not any of that group will actually end up being charged, I'm not so sure, because they were essentially known associates and family members that the police got to quickly, and obviously were wanting to question quickly, but that may not ultimately lead to charges. And I think we also learned an awful lot about the new reality of policing counter-terrorism last night. It took 8 armed officers firing 50 rounds to try and prevent any further loss of life. It was an unprecedented use of aggressive force by police in this country, but of course that use of aggressive force has its risks. A member of the public being shot and injured, though thankfully not seriously so.
Daniel, we mentioned the fact, of course, that it's a comprehensive, it's a very extensive inquiry at this stage. Talk to us about the next few days and the kind of scope of the investigation as we look ahead.
Well, I think we can expect more raids and more arrests in the next few hours. I think that's inevitable as police learn more about these men and try and expand their knowledge about them. But as we've discussed 3 times now this year, one of the key questions is going to be whether this was a group of men who plotted alone, or whether they had a wider group of people that were assisting them here in the UK, or whether indeed they were being guided from overseas. And I think at this stage police are not yet sure about the answers to those questions. And I think there's a very important other aspect to the policing in the days and weeks ahead, and that is going to be reassurance, because after 3 attacks in 3 months. There is a concern amongst the police, the security services and government that frankly members of the public are going to start to panic, start to worry whether or not the police and the security services are in control of this issue, and they'll be wanting to reassure the public that they're doing everything they can to prevent further loss of life and to reduce further loss of life.
Daniel, again, thanks very much. Daniel Sanford there, Home Affairs correspondent at Scotland Yard. And as Daniel was underlining there, this is the second terrorist attack in Britain in under a fortnight, and as he was saying, the third in the space of 3 months. Earlier today, the Prime Minister, speaking in Downing Street after chairing the Cabinet's Emergency Committee, she was calling for a new approach to tackle what she called the single evil ideology of Islamist extremism. Our security correspondent Frank Gardner looks now at the options as they currently stand within the intelligence community for tackling the terrorist threat.
March the 22nd, Westminster. A lone attacker uses a 4x4 and knives to murder pedestrians and a policeman. May the 22nd, Manchester Arena. A suicide bomber kills 22 people, including children. And June the 3rd, London. Terrorists kill 7 and injure dozens using a truck and knives. Armed police have spent years training for exactly these sort of marauding attacks. They now have more powerful weapons, better intelligence, and a faster reaction time than ever before. Yet what they're up against is a growing problem.
The country needs to wake up to the fact that this is an increasing, not a decreasing threat, both globally and, of course, within our midst, within our communities here in the UK. It's an increasing threat that needs to be confronted head-on. And it's not just in terms of resource for intelligence agencies and for the police. We need to confront it in terms of its ideology and the theology that's driving this threat.
Also driving it is the imminent loss of IS's self-proclaimed caliphate in Syria and Iraq. After 2 years of brutal rule, the jihadists look set to be driven out of both Mosul and Raqqa. Their fugitive leaders are calling for revenge attacks in Europe. A former Islamist says the West is damned by jihadists, whatever it does.
Where we do intervene in foreign policy, we are blamed by jihadists, such as in Iraq. And where we don't intervene, like in Syria, we're blamed yet again by jihadists for not caring about Muslim lives. The only factors that are consistent out of these are the identity crisis and the ideological narrative. That's something we can do something about. We need to foster the kind of society in which people feel they belong.
Meanwhile, the advice given by the Metropolitan Police to the public is blunt. In the event of a terrorist attack, they're telling people to run, tell and hide, at least until the threat is dealt with. The scale of the terrorist threat is daunting. At least 500 active plots under investigation, around 3,000 subjects of interest being monitored, and a further 20,000 individuals in a wider network. 3 terrorist attacks getting through in just 3 months throws an uncomfortable spotlight on MI5, the security service behind me. It's their job to try and provide the intelligence to stop these before they happen. And they have helped do that successfully 18 times in the last 4 years. But now, the scale of the problem facing this country is causing some to question whether they can cope with what they're up against. GCHQ, the government's listening station, is engaged in a constant battle to break into terrorist communications. A former independent reviewer of terrorism legislation believes tech companies should do more.
Well, I think there is a need for change in approach. Some years ago, one of the big tech companies said to me, "We're merely a library." That just won't do. There now has to be law that makes it clear to them that they're not merely a library. They are big companies. They have the economies bigger than many nations, and they have a responsibility to all of us to ensure that unlawful terrorist content does not appear on the internet anymore.
Tonight, Britain remains at threat level severe, the second highest below critical, meaning a further attack is thought highly likely. That threat is unlikely to subside soon. Frank Gardner, BBC News.
Well, there are some new developments that we can now discuss tonight, and with me is our security correspondent, Gordon Carrera. Gordon, what have you learned?
Well, in the last few moments, there's been a statement from so-called Islamic State claiming that a security unit of its fighters, is the way they describe them, carried out the London attacks. Now, the group frequently claim attacks for which they were in no way involved, so we shouldn't automatically take that as IS involvement. But I think in this case, the security services will be investigating this very seriously. They're already looking at a number of elements of this attack. I mean, we've had 3 attacks in the last few months. Khalid Massoud in Westminster acted alone. Salman Abedi acted alone, but perhaps had some kind of support in Libya. In this case, though, you had a group of 3 people. And the security services will want to know what connected those people. Were they a group of friends? Were they part of some other group? Were any of them known to the security services before? That's quite likely. But secondly, what triggered this attack? Just yesterday, there was a propaganda poster from so-called Islamic State which featured a picture of a white truck, a knife and a gun, and called on people to kill civilians using these. Now, was that the inspiration? Well, perhaps, although this group might have been planning it for longer, but it could have been seen by the group as an instruction to go ahead and carry out an attack. So the security services will be looking at that very closely, trying to understand if there was contact with IS abroad in any way. And I think that internet propaganda also explains why you heard such a tough line from the Prime Minister about the internet today. Finally, the threat level has not gone up to critical. We saw that after Manchester, where there were concerns about more material that could have been used to make bombs. It's not gone up in this case. I think if it does go up, that would be a worrying sign that they think are other people connected to this group who could be dangerous. If it remains where it is, they will hope that the threat from this group has now passed, has stopped. But of course, it still means that another terrorist attack by some other group is still highly likely.
Gordon, thank you very much for the latest update there. Gordon Carrera there, our security correspondent. Well, last night's attack happened just 4 days, as we know, before the general election, which will go ahead as planned on Thursday. National campaigning was suspended by all the major parties today, except for UKIP. The Prime Minister insisting that established methods of tackling extremism had to change. We've been talking about that a little, and that there'd been far too much tolerance of extremism in our country. Those are the words she used.